Video games have had a long history with difficulty, going as far back as the early arcade games. Arcade cabinets like Gauntlet, Zaxxon, and Sinistar gobbled up change with just how hard they were. This is exactly what arcade cabinets were designed to do: eat your money through a specifically designed level of difficulty. When video games made the jump to the home console market in the mid-80s, these design elements followed suit. Early console games were built on this arbitrary challenge, but developers would soon move their design philosophies to challenging players to play skillfully. Games on the NES like Castlevania, Megaman, and Ninja Gaiden would carry this torch all the way through the mid-90s. It's around this time that something interesting happened in the video game industry. The polygonal age was here, and with the advent of the Nintendo 64, the Sony PlayStation, and the Sega Saturn, games saw a surge in graphical advancements as well as the jump to 3D. Game developers seemingly forgot about difficulty in favor of advancing games to look as pretty as possible. Some games would continue to carry the legacy of challenging but fair gameplay, but for a while that all but dissipated. That is, until 2009, when a team of Japanese developers, mostly known for their mech combat games, launched a dark fantasy title that would both harken back to the roots of tough-as-nails retro games, as well as inspire revival challenging gameplay. The developer? From Software. The game? Demon's Souls. Demon's Souls was released in North America in October 2009 to wide critical acclaim, and despite a lack of marketing, was a modest hit, selling over 500,000 copies in its first year on the market. Demon's Souls resonated with both critics and fans alike with its challenging but fair gameplay, and would lead to a spiritual successor that would bust the floodgates wide open for this particular style of game. From Software's Dark Souls was an immediate hit, receiving glowing reviews and selling over 1 million copies in its first year. The success of Dark Souls led to 2 direct sequels and a spiritual sequel in Bloodborne, also incredibly well received and financially successful. It would also lead to a resurgence in games showcasing this return to difficult gameplay. Games like Nioh, Titan Souls, Lords of the Fallen, and Hyper Light Drifter all followed down the path that Dark Souls blazed. It is the grouping of Souls games that stand out to me in this modern group of difficult games, and that's because of their striking similarity to one of my favorite game series, a series that defined punishing but fair some 21 years before Demon's Souls' release, known as Megaman. I'm sure that many of you are wondering, what in the world do Megaman and Dark Souls have in common? While a lot of people may look at the two and only see them as similar in their difficulty level, they share a lot. Let's start with the most obvious commonality between the two series. They're absolutely punishing difficulty. Both Dark Souls and Mega Man are ruthless in their difficulty, but unlike some games that supercharge their enemies and throw even more of said enemies at you, both the Souls games and Mega Man games specifically design their enemy encounters to challenge the player with skill. The baddies aren't completely overpowered and are placed methodically to allow players to be tested, but not unreasonably so. The levels in both series are designed to contest players, but not crush them arbitrarily. These two design solutions coalesce when it comes to the overall design philosophies between the two series of needing skill. The games require skillful play in order to complete. That is true across both sets of titles, but in different ways. The Souls series wants and ultimately needs you to learn how to move in space and use the various combat techniques precisely in order to make your ways through the world and eventually beat the game. Mega Man does similar things. In order to make it through any one particular game in the series, you need to move and shoot precisely. The platforming aspects of the game are designed in exactly this manner. To this point, each series focuses a lot on movement. Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne in particular make a concerted effort in letting you know that your speed and movement is important. The roll is very close to the Mega Man equivalent of the slide or dash. The precise movements and button presses are the key to mastering the gameplay in both sets of games and make their way into possibly their most appealing aspects, their boss battles. The boss battles in both the Mega Man and Souls games would make most developers blush. These are encounters that require you to use every skill you learn throughout the levels leading up to the boss battles to defeat them. It also can't be understated just how memorable these boss battles are. It's hard to forget your first encounter with Cutman, Metal Man, or Magnet Man, just as it's similarly hard to forget your first encounters with Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder, Yorm the Giant, or Father Gascoigne. These fights are intense and are designed to give the player a true test of their skills. It's also interesting that after each of these boss fights, players are rewarded for their efforts. Mega Man gives you the items of the defeated bosses, and the Soul series offers the boss souls that can be used to create boss weapons or to upgrade the character, much like regular souls. These boss fights require every bit of knowledge and upgrades you've garnered throughout the game to this point. This goes even more so for the final battles that put to use everything you've learned in the game. The muscle memory and trial and error type of gameplay that is effectively used in these boss battles is the key to mastering the gameplay across each series, and that bleeds over into the environmental hazards that mark the worlds of all the games involved. Mega Man's hazards are quite obvious, with traps that come from the walls and ceilings, the spikes and bottomless pits, all bringing instant death to the player. The Soul series operates in a very similar manner, even incorporating several of these elements into their levels as well. Perilous cliffsides drop off into bottomless pits. Traps litter areas. Watery areas immediately drown the player upon falling in, just to name a few. And while we're talking about the levels and their environmental hazards, it should also be stated just how beautiful the level design is across each series. Each individual stage of Mega Man is built around the robot master that you fight at the end of the level, resulting in unique color palettes and an interesting use of environments. The Souls games also manage to cram a lot of variety in the worlds that the players inhabit. The semi-open world area of Dark Souls known as the Firelink Shrine opens up to the Catacombs, the New Londo Ruins, and the Undead Burg, all of which are quite distinct from one another. Both series also allow you to select your own path. The Souls series definitely tries to urge you into a specific route, but you can still mostly go through the game any way that you like. Mega Man allows the players to select the order in which they defeat the Robot Masters. And the Robot Masters lead me back to yet another characteristic that both sets of series share. Both series are built on scant in-game stories that are actually quite expansive and very melodramatic. Mega Man's story is built around the constant struggle between Dr. Light and the evil Dr. Wily. Dr. Wily's evil robots were originally created by Dr. Light and intended for the purposes of making the world a better place, but were reprogrammed by Dr. Wily to help in his plan for world domination. Dark Souls' story is equally melodramatic, built around the concept of a cycle in which sacrifices are made to the first flame in order to stave off an age of darkness. It's a lot more in-depth and honestly more convoluted than that, but that's the gist. What's really interesting is that almost none of this is told explicitly in-game. There are of course clues to the massive overarching stories of both series, but in-game storytelling is minimal. Difficulty in NES games was pretty commonplace, but rarely was it done as well as it was in Mega Man. Mega Man built its entire identity on being a challenging but fair game, and proved that over a series of 10 core games and multiple spin-offs, including the impeccable Mega Man X series. Some 20 odd years later, the Dark Souls series and its related games begin building a similar legacy. That, however, isn't the only thing that makes these games so similar. Despite appearing completely different, the DNA that sets Mega Man apart from the other Tough as Nails games on the NES infects all the design principles of the Soul series of games, and coincidentally differentiates them from the games that they inspired. In another 20 years, it's entirely possible that these same design principles will infect a whole new set of games, and I truly hope that that is the case.
Thanks everyone for watching this video. Please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so then you're notified on all of the content released on the Culture Pop channel. Also, don't forget to share this channel with your friends so that then they can also enjoy all the content that Culture Pop has to offer.